Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dwayne Brown with NASA headquarters, and we're here at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory awaiting one of the agency's biggest moments. Over the past few days, you've heard about Mars Science Laboratory, Curiosity, and now we're going to flip the script a little bit. No graphics, no PowerPoint, no animation, just straight talk, informal talk. We roll up our sleeves and we hear from the personal thoughts, wishes, and goals of two of the most accomplished leaders in our nation's space program. They will not only talk about how they feel about tonight, the big picture of the space program, but also answer the what if question. They provide a couple of opening remarks, a few minutes of remarks, and then we'll open up for Q&A. First up will be Dr. John Grunsfeld, Associate Administrator for NASA's Science Mission Directorate, and Dr. Charles Elachi, the Director of the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Dr. Grunsfeld.
Thank you very much, Dwayne. So I'd like this to be very informal. This is your opportunity to ask us, those questions, kind of get into the spirit of the day here. As I walked into Von Karman Auditorium, it was, very quiet out on the mall. I had a chance to walk by the model of the Curiosity rover, and nothing was stirring at all. And it's definitely the quiet before the storm. This tremendous anticipation for this mission. Obviously, it's been in cruise for months. Everything's been going great. The spacecraft itself is doing well. But we're about to do something that I think is, just huge for humankind. To put this chemistry laboratory on the surface of Mars that can rove, that can see, and that's going to provide scientists on Earth a glimpse into the past history of Mars, but it's also about our own history. And I think about John Wesley Powell, the American geologist exploring the American West, going down into the Grand Canyon, which gives us that rare peek of our Earth's history back a couple of billion years. And with the Curiosity rover in Gale Crater, we hope to get that same kind of picture of the history of Mars going back billions of years to the times when Mars once might have been wet. And we think that from our orbital reconnaissance using the Mars Reconnaissance Odyssey and the Mars Express mission, and all of our reconnaissance, including the Spirit and Opportunity rovers, but particularly in Gale Crater, we have this amazing chance to look back in the past and answer the fundamental question, could Mars have had salty seas that might have been conducive to microbial life developing, and are there any signs that might have happened? So that's all great, but it's much bigger than that. This is Curiosity has captured the imagination of the nation and the world, and the events that are going on just surrounding tonight, which is the entry, descent, and landing, the 7 minutes, the shortest part of this 2-year mission, is captured the fascination of the world for good reason, and Charles will probably talk about that. But the huge leverage will be once Curiosity is all checked out and starts roving and starts doing science, I'm absolutely convinced that the kids who watch and the people who watch the entry, descent, and landing tonight will be engaged for the full mission, part of that discovery, vicarious discovery, and will remember tonight in the way that I remember the Apollo 11 landing when I was in summer school in 1969. Many of you have heard me say that. As I'm saying it here on the stage, I'm already getting chills about tonight. I know from my own kids, since they weren't alive then, this will be one of the most significant nights of their lives as they watch the Curiosity mission. So I'm very excited about that. But before I hand it over to Charles, I need to satisfy my own curiosity just for a minute. So with your indulgence, I have to ask Charles, what's up with the peanuts?
Well, I'm sure that many of you who have been to previous events at JPL, you will notice just before we go into orbit or before we land, a bag of peanuts or a can of peanuts gets circulated from in front of everybody in the mission operation room. Well, this goes back to almost 40 years ago when JPL started doing planetary mission. For some reason, they got in the habit that this brings good luck. Yeah, this is not advertising for anybody, but it's somehow it started that tradition, and we carried it with us, and it has always brought us good luck. So if tonight you see us passing peanuts, it's not because we are hungry, but it's because that we think that will bring us good luck. So that's the story on this one. Let me add a little bit to what John was saying. This morning I got up, at 8 o'clock, and we had at our house, I have our daughter and her husband and my grandkids and my wife's brother and wife's sister and wife's mom all coming, to see this event. And my wife said, "Well, how are you feeling this morning?" I said, "I'm really feeling good. I'm nervous, but I'm really feeling good." And I was supposed to come here at 12 o'clock, but by 10 o'clock I couldn't resist. So I drove in, went into the mission operation room, sat in the back, and it was kind of quiet. And I sat down and really thought about what a great thing, what a mighty thing we're doing, today. So I took those 5 minutes of, quiet to think about it. And one of my favorite quotes is from President Teddy Roosevelt, which I'm going to kind of say it not exactly like he said it, that it's far better to dare mighty things, even though there is a risk of failure, than to sit in the twilight and not know neither of victory nor defeat. And I think the team, that is working today, that is going to be landing the spacecraft, the team that have done it from all across NASA, from all across the nation, from all across the world, are really doing very mighty things on behalf of all of us. And I think at 10:32, Mars is going to be different than at 10:31, tonight, because we will have an explorer, hopefully successfully on that planet, as John was saying, exploring and giving us more information on how did Mars evolve. Why did Mars, which have very similar features at Earth, why is it different today? Why did life evolve here and did not evolve on Mars in the same way? So things are going to be different at 10:32, 10:33, and over the next weeks and months, and years. And to put it in a context, we have to keep thinking that as we speak today, we have dozens of spacecrafts across the solar system, which have the NASA logo, on them, and the American flag, and the NASA and the JPL logo on it. And these are providing science in a way completely different than when I was young, at school, like John was saying. Before we used to have a mission and wait for 5-6 years so we can verify a hypothesis. Remember, on Mars we have been now continuously for 15 years. Our nation had continuous presence on Mars from 15 years, since the time we landed Pathfinder. And then with the orbiters and the landers. And I challenged our team who are working on Opportunity. I told them, please make sure Opportunity continue to work until after tonight, so we can say we have continuous presence, beyond that. So anyway, it is a great day. It is a great moment, and not only for us here, for everybody. It is a great day, and we wish the team success, and I'm sure you all will be cheering for us, to achieve success tonight.
Okay. So again, we want to keep this informal, but we are going to have you wait for the mic and give your name and affiliation. And again, this is straight talk. Everything's on the table. Can you raise your hand, and we'll start here.
I'm Alan Boyle with NBC News, and please tell us what's up with the Mars program. Besides the peanuts, what's the latest on the planning for the next Mars mission after Maven?
So, Ellen, thank you. The next mission is Maven. It launches next year. It's an upper atmospheric mission. Beyond that, we're in the planning stages of, what is the next, not just the next mission, but what is the framework for the next era of Mars exploration. And I think the Curiosity landing and roving will help to inform that. But what we're specifically trying to do is build this framework with options and then try and isolate what is the next best step for the 2018 opportunity. And so until I get the report and the planning. So the next step is the Mars Program Planning Group, which is something that Charlie Bolden asked me to spin up a team, including human spaceflight and technology, Bill Gerstenmaier, my counterpart in human spaceflight, Mason Peck, my counterpart in technology, to come together and come up with a NASA plan, not just a science plan, but a Mars exploration plan that incorporates, of course, the science objectives, but also looks forward to a time when we'll send humans to Mars, gals and guys to do astrobiology, planetary science on the surface, and enabled by technology. And look at all the pieces. Look at how the International Space Station fits in, the Space Launch System, some of the technology in terms of things like atomic clocks, optical comm, new propulsion, electric propulsion, all these kind of things. Cue it up and see where the pieces fit to try and find those opportunities of synergy that leverage the whole NASA program. So that's being queued up for this fall. Once we have the report from the Mars Program Planning Group, we'll then start to engage the community in additional studies, hopefully leading to sometime early next year with the release of the President's budget, some ideas of specifically what those plans will be.
So things are going to be on hold until that process is complete?
Well, I think it's going to take a while. If we decide whether the 2018 mission is an orbiter or a lander, we may spool up an instrument definition team, but that's kind of a natural timeline. So the release of the President's budget is not so much the motive force, but a good time scale.
And maybe one thing to add to what John was saying, I'm sure you all know that we can go to Mars every 26 months, but also 18 is a pretty good opportunity, from celestial mechanics, from the dynamic, or celestial mechanics. So it's an important opportunity to make sure we capitalize on, in addition to keeping the momentum, of the program.
Irene?
Thanks. I'm Irene Klotz with Reuters and Discovery News. How much does curiosity play a role as kind of a hinge in different alternatives to what might come next on Mars? Meaning, if it's lands and successful, how might that lead to a group of missions versus if it's not successful, where the Mars program might head?
Well, I can say clearly it's a very important element of the overall program because it's addressing a very important scientific questions, of understanding on the chemistry, if you want, of the samples that we'll be acquiring. So it's clearly very important. Now, like in any strategic planning, you plan on success, and sometimes you plan what if something doesn't work. Things have happened before, and in the late, about 10 years ago, 12 years ago, where we did have a failure, but within 4 years after that, we had a rover on the surface of Mars. So that shows the commitment, and I think with all the discussion with John and Charlie Bolden and the administration, there is a strong commitment to continue the exploration of Mars. And in like every exploration, every once in a while you get a setback. And the challenge is, how do you recuperate from that setback and make sure you quickly learn from it and address, the question, which are still the same, the astrobiological question, the chemistry question, and so on. So we have to have a program which is pretty agile in adjusting and adapting depending on the new discoveries or lack of discoveries.
There's no doubt, though, that a roving curiosity is going to make discoveries. And I think what Charles has said that I'm acutely sensitive to is, what's the nature of those discoveries? We are going to find sedimentary rocks because we can see them from orbit. Finding out how they were laid down, by what kind of wet process, and what minerals there are, that's what these chemistry laboratories will do so spectacularly. And if we see, something that looks really exciting, that will guide what the future missions are. If we see something that looks tantalizing but maybe isn't indicative that there was habitable conditions in Gale Crater billions of years ago, that might take us in a different direction. Maybe we look for modern volatiles, modern water, rather than going back to ancient terrain. And so it's these kind of things that will guide us. But the exciting thing is those discoveries are just in front of us.
Thanks. And here's a question I'm sure every astronaut wonders about at night is, if there's, under a continuing resolution and with the prospect of an election and Congress unlikely to take action on a budget, is a 2018 Mars mission still on the table?
For looking at some kind of across-the-board cut, we're not currently planning for that. I'm confident that between the administration and the Congress, they're going to work something out. I think the great thing is that NASA and NASA science exploration has widespread support, certainly in the administration, but on both sides of the aisle in Congress, in the Senate, in the House, and the American people. And so I think the 2018 thing is something we're looking forward to, and that is something we're planning to.
Yeah, and let me add one thing also to what John is saying. Just looking at the excitement and the engagement that the public had in this mission. I mean, millions of hits on the 7 minutes of terror. So my hope, and by the way, this is across the whole country, not only people who are space geeks like some of us. People from all walks of life think that this is one of the most exciting things we do. And at the end, I will have to think that the people in Washington are our representatives. They are represented what the public wants. And this is, I think, one of the, I'm so encouraged, with a strong, positive engagement that the public is doing. And I'm sure people will realize that they are there to basically satisfy what the taxpayer wants. So I'm hopeful.
Sir?
Yes, Olivier Sanguy and JoshSpace.com from France. Perhaps a bit naive question, but I remember that for Viking, there was Viking 1 and 2, was Mars Exploration Rover Spirit and Opportunity. Curiosity got no twin. Was it only a budget question, or was it a confidence in the system, or just a logistic problem?
Or why we had only one, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, always you do a trade in these things. You always do a trade between cost and risk on doing these things. So in the case of Spirit and Opportunity, remember, it was the first time we put a large size rover on Mars. I mean, we had Pathfinder, which we learned a little bit, from it. So it made sense at that time, to do a dual system, Now we feel a little bit more confident. It's not 100% sure. It will never be 100% sure. But feel a lot more confident about how do we enter, descent, and land, on another planet, even that it's a little bit different, by using the sky crane. But the first steps are very similar. The heat shield, the retro rocket, the parachute, they are very similar. So it's a little bit of gain of confidence. Now, of course, you always would like to have redundancy in everything, but you have to create the balance between the risk and the cost. And we elected to do it that way.
Now that said, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the Curiosity bus, the system, not the instruments themselves, but the bus, was designed to be somewhat modular, so that if in the future we want to replicate it with a different suite, I think it would be more straightforward. All the drawings are now in electronic CAD drawings. The engineering has been done. You could, in principle, build another one much more easily than we could have as in the case of Viking or some of the other missions.
Yeah, that's correct.
You would certainly save a lot of the non-recurring engineering costs, as we say.
Frank?
I'm Frank Boring with Aviation Week. To continue the budget discussion just a little bit with you, John, as a telescope guy. Across your larger portfolio, I know you're tracking Webb very closely. Is it holding course, or is that a threat against future Mars programs? And also, you've gotten a couple of big mirrors from the National Reconnaissance Office, which someone described to me as sort of like having your rich uncle give you a Ferrari engine. What are you going to do with that opportunity, the larger science portfolio and the other calls on that limited budget?
Well, let me start with the James Webb Space Telescope. It's doing great on schedule, budget. We've got the mid-infrared instrument already delivered to Goddard, and it's going through integration and test. The fine guidance sensor, which are the eyes, if you will, and a scientific instrument for James Webb from Canada, the Canadian Space Agency, that's just been delivered to Goddard. So the backplane is completed, the mirrors are completed. It's actually coming together as a telescope. Now that said, once we put all the pieces together and start testing it at cryogenic temperatures, we're going to find problems. That's why we build and test. And the same was true of the Mars Science Lab. It's true of everything we do. So you're going to hear about some of those issues coming up. And so in order to make sure that the project goes forward on schedule and on budget, we actually plan for those problems to occur. I can't tell you what they'll be now, because if I knew what they were, we'd fix them before we get to test. But we're going into the really interesting and difficult phase. But the project is doing really well. They're actually ahead on some milestones, meeting the rest of the milestones, meeting the budget targets, and moving forward into that integration and test phase. And we are watching it very closely. We're making good management decisions, and that's the key. Make decisions on a timely basis, catch the bad decisions quickly, move on, and the team is doing just a great job doing that. So I'm very confident on James Webb. The two optics systems that we got, parts of telescopes from the National Reconnaissance Office, we're currently storing those. We have folks looking at the data, but we haven't yet decided what the path forward is. And there are various paths. Certainly they could be interesting as an astronomical telescope, but we haven't done the work yet to say, what exactly can they do, what kind of performance, and how would we go forward. But I think, in the coming months, we'll be able to talk about that some more. I think we ought to just focus on Mars today.
Eric?
Hi, John. Eric Hand with Nature.
Hi, Eric.
Last month, you were due to make a decision in Discovery. That decision was delayed to mid-August now. One of the three candidates is a Mars lander that could potentially launch in 2016. Did you delay the decision in order to see the results of the Curiosity landing? And if so, how would success or failure affect your decision in Discovery? Thanks.
Yeah, so I've been working pretty much nonstop. So the days are blurring into each other. When you work over a weekend, suddenly the weeks don't have night's natural boundaries. I actually got the Discovery briefings Friday or Monday. I don't remember exactly. So I've just gotten the briefings on the three missions that are in competition. And so we're now kind of in the, now that I have all the data and the executive team in Science Mission Directorate, the voting team has seen all of the actual data, recommendation has been made. We're within a week or so of making a decision, and then it'll make its way through the chain. So as far as I know, there was no delay for any reason other than possibly what day of last week was I going to get briefed. So this is one of the exciting things about the job, is that I'm actually the selection official for these important missions. It's also the hard part of the job, simply because I can tell you that I was presented 3 missions, and the best answer is fund them all. But unfortunately, we don't have the money to do that. So now we have to decide, what the path forward is. So within a week or two.
Leonard?
Hi, Leonard David with Aerospace America magazine. If indeed you have a bad day at Mars, what's the message you do want to relay to the space community and the public community?
Well, I tell you, I kind of touched on it earlier. When you are doing exploration, you are not guaranteed of success. Even gold medalists in the Olympics are not guaranteed, of getting gold medal again. So that's what's important about human exploration when we explore. We know that there is risk. And if you don't take bold moves and you don't take bold missions, you'll never make the progress that we are expecting, from it. Hopefully, we have done everything we can. And I know we have done everything we can, to be successful. But there is always a risk of something will fail. And if that happens, I hope it doesn't, but if that happens, I think we'll quickly learn why it happened, get back on our feet and continue our exploration. And that's what happened, 15 years ago. That's what happened when we did Rangers and Surveyors. Some of you remember that. We'd have to try 6 times before we were able to get, to hit the moon. And then a few years later, we had the footprints of Neil Armstrong on the surface of the moon. We didn't shy away because we had a setback. So I hope that that's what will happen. Now, of course, I hope more that it will be successful.
And apparently the difference between Ranger 6 and 7 was the peanuts.
Maybe I'll open it later. I think it
Just to follow on, the really hard work to get Curiosity, to the point where it's, still encased, about to hit the top of the atmosphere with the Mars Science Laboratory, spacecraft, is, the investment that we've made in the people and the technology to get to this point. And so that investment would not be lost on a bad day. We won't get the science. The science is the end result that we all want, to get science into the hands of scientists around the country and the world to understand Mars. But we're not going to give up on Mars if we have a bad day. And the technology that went into the power source for MSL, into the wheels, into the titanium spokes of the wheels. You know, there are people in Chattanooga, Tennessee, who formed those particular titanium pieces. The chemistry laboratory that would normally fill, you know, a series of lab racks in a chemistry laboratory with the team, you know, from the French and the Germans and the folks at the Goddard Space Flight Center that took all of that equipment and here at JPL, put it into the size of a microwave. You know, they now know how to do that, and they're working on future instruments. You know, that's the investment we made. 7,000 people, you know, made in America to be able to get MSL to the point where we're just about to put Curiosity on the surface. And that's of great value. We shouldn't underestimate that, no matter how it turns out tonight, which will turn out well.
Yeah, to add to John, I mean, every single dollar was spent here, you know, on the ground, you know, in very high-tech advances and technology development. So all of that we have gained. The science will be the one which will get delayed if we have a bad day.
Just a quick follow-up on you know, we got used to the airbags, and maybe we'll get used to the sky crane. But what do you see as the future of those two entry systems playing in even some of these lower-cost missions? Are that we're going to be seeing those again, or are we going to see something even more different than
More
the
esoteric.
two?
Well, I mean, it really scales depend on what is the science and the size of the rover that you want to do. As you probably know, the reason we did not do airbag is not because we don't like them. We like them a lot. But the rover is much bigger, you know, that we cannot handle it with airbags for this, you know, for this case. And the size of the rover was driven by the scientific objective. Now you say, what if we want something well beyond the 1 ton, you know, which we landed? We are actually developing, as we speak, inflatable, you know, heat shields and larger parachutes. And these will be tested in a program about a year from now. There have been some tests that Langley has done literally a couple of weeks ago.
Yep.
So there are new technology which will enable us to land even larger platform. And then after you have to size it depending on your experiment that you are doing. So you can drive a Volkswagen or you need a truck depending what your science objective for that mission.
And you'll see that in this Mars Program Planning Group output, that they're looking at mixing this technology for increasing capability over time, leading up to putting larger things on the surface, in situ resource utilization, but specifically, you know, on the entry, descent, and landing phase, on things like the hypersonic deceleration powered, supersonic decelerators, you know, things that can get you beyond MSL, but also to refine the medium scales, so across the board. And that's the power of combining our technology efforts with our science efforts with the human spaceflight efforts.
And to add to what John is saying, like on future mission, you also might see optical communication if we need higher data rates than what we are doing now, so versus radio communication. So all of these new development that we are doing, we'll have to match them depending what's objective that we're trying to accomplish.
Okay, a few more questions over here, then we're going to go over to our social media folks, and then we'll come back to the media side of the house. So, sir?
Thank you. Steve Gorman with Reuters. And what I was going to ask you is sort of a corollary to the last question, which is sort of the flip side, which is if you could talk about how much, in what way, how much NASA and the space agency and the space program overall has riding on the successful outcome of this, of the landing. And I mean, all landings and deployments of these things are important, but if this one sort of comes at a particular time in NASA's history that makes it especially important for a success to occur, and if you could talk about that and whether this means something to NASA's prestige and other factors.
Well, certainly I think every mission that we fly, and you know, and just in science alone, we have over 61 missions currently flying. We have a couple of dozen more that are in development for launch just in the next couple of years. And you know, as you look around, I mean, you know, here at JPL, and think about, you know, the fact that we have operating missions at Cassini, we have Hubble Space Telescope, we have, you know, a whole line of satellites we call the A-Train observing the Earth. You know, every mission, whether it's, you know, about to land on Mars or it's operating on orbit, you know, we consider as being very precious and special. That said, you know, obviously there's a lot of risk in spaceflight. It's much harder than just about anything we do here on Earth. And I think the event we're going to see tonight is probably the hardest thing we've tried, certainly at Mars, maybe the hardest thing we've tried in any robotic spacecraft. And you know, so that means the outcome is uncertainty. But that's what drives, you know, people to perform at much higher levels, is that challenge, the excitement of the challenge, and the potential return. And I think in that respect, the potential return from understanding the planetary history of Mars is really huge and will certainly affect our plans going forward for other science missions to Mars, other missions to other planetary bodies, Europa, Enceladus, Titan, the outer planets, depending upon what we find. And so, I mean, that's the exciting part. The flip side is if we have a failure, you know, we're going to have to take some time and figure out what went wrong. But in the sense of exploration, and this is true, you know, throughout history, you know, we'll dust ourselves off, pick ourselves up, and we'll move forward, and we'll be back on Mars. You know, if you want to think about, you know, a tough story, you know, think about Shackleton and his men, you know, trying to get to the Antarctic, and you know, they all survived, and they went on to explore further.
Okay, hi, this is Mike Wall from space.com. Yeah, John, I mean, a quick question. Obviously, sample return is something that's very high on that sort of, I don't know, list of priorities for scientists around the world, NASA too. I'm just wondering if you can just maybe talk for a few minutes about, I mean, is that still feasible under the current budget situation? Is that something that you're still shooting for? And if so, I mean, when do you think that could be pulled off?
One of the marching orders for the Mars Program Planning Group was to maintain the science drivers for Mars exploration as they looked forward at this framework. And so Mars sample return is still a crucial element of that. You know, keeping in mind that, you know, we were forced to back out of the planning stages of the 2016 and 2018 collaboration with the Europeans because of the fiscal climate and the constrained environment. But that was not a sample return mission. You know, that was primarily an exploration mission to test out technology, and one of the technologies that was going to be tested out was to cache some samples. But the plan to actually go launch those samples to orbit and bring them back to Earth, you know, was very far out in the future and not really funded or clear. The tough part of sample return is not getting to the surface. Well, everything's tough, but getting to the surface and finding interesting places is what we pioneered with Spirit and Opportunity. With the Mars Science Laboratory Curiosity rover, we're going the next step, which is to be able to go to the most interesting places, or place, and we only got to go to one, but there were many more interesting places, based on orbital reconnaissance. So the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, Odyssey, Mars Express identified Gale Crater prospecting from orbit as a place that we wanted to go. Now we're going to get the ground truth and actually go to the places that look the most interesting and do the science, the cosmochemistry. If we see something that looks just incredible, but the Mars Science Laboratory can't answer all the questions, then that identifies the kind of intelligently sampled, intelligently discovered place we would want to get a sample with context. You know, that will have the stratigraphy that tells us the record, we'll have the reconnaissance from orbit, so we can say, you know, this is a place we really would have wanted to get a sample if we could. But MSL will pioneer, Curiosity will pioneer that process. What's next? Well, we still have to prove that we can get something off of the surface to Mars orbit and from Mars orbit back to Earth. And so as part of the Mars Program Planning Group, you know, they're going to queue up those technologies and say, well, when can we demonstrate something called a Mars Ascent Vehicle? When can we demonstrate a return vehicle? How do all those puzzle pieces or chess pieces play out move after move to be able to show that we have the technology? And the hope is that with a series of technology missions combined with science missions, combined with precursor human missions, you know, evaluating the radiation environment, the cruise environment, that we can put together a program where we'll actually get Mars samples back, the right samples, sooner than we would have under the old plan of trying to do it with a series of flagships.
Yeah, let me add one point to what, or emphasize one point that John made. Just remember how we got to MSL. We started with Pathfinder, a rover about this big, barely knew how to drive it. Then we moved up to Spirit and Opportunity, which is significantly more capable. And even there at the beginning, if you recall, we had some challenges. And we had to learn step by step of how you drive a rover and how you assess the terrain and so on, and that got us to MSL. Hopefully, with a successful Curiosity mission, at least we would have learned how to land and rove very well, you know, on another planet. So the key element is what John said, is how do you take now a sample and put it in orbit? And that's something that we need to figure out a way, how do we do it stepwise? So we have all the pieces that then we can build a sample return mission.
Okay, one more question here. We'll go over to our social media folks, and then we'll wrap up with a few more questions from our media. Yes?
Gina Sinceri, ABC News. John, as an astronaut/astronomer, where would you rather go, an asteroid or Mars, and why?
I'd rather go to Mars. Mars, we live in a solar system filled with diversity, and they're fantastic places. Jupiter, over 60 moons of Jupiter, some of which are very tantalizing. They may have signs, of oceans, subsurface oceans, salty oceans that could be, could harbor life, Europa. However, we don't want to go anywhere near, astronauts don't want to go anywhere near Jupiter. The radiation environment will kill you, literally. Saturn would be awesome to go see Saturn. But Mars is uniquely a planet, being so similar to Earth, with an atmosphere, with a surface that we can walk on in the same kind of spacesuits that we used on the moon or similar, and that humans might one day live on. It's that human element that makes it so compelling versus going out and going somewhere that would be fascinating. Going to an asteroid would be fascinating to explore, but it's really not a potential human destination. For resource utilization, for understanding the history of the formation of the solar system, these are all valid reasons. But as far as the sheer adventure, Mars is the place that I think current generation astronauts aspire to. Someday, it's going to be a planet around a nearby star when we discover some Earth twin. Give your name.
I'm Rachel Sanders from the NASA Social Group. We've talked a lot about bad days, but on a good day, the rovers landed. Can you go
mean
over
tonight?
Yeah, exactly. Can you go over some of the science and some of the experiments that you're really excited to do and to see in the upcoming months?
Okay. You mean not today, but over the next few months?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, clearly the first thing which is going to be done in the science is to look at the scene around you and to explore, from as a geomorphologist, I mean, not me, but a geomorphologist would look at the scene in front of them, look at the detail in front of them, and they can learn a lot on the, on the processes which happen there. But for me, probably the most exciting thing is going to be when we take samples. First, by zapping the rock with the laser, see what kind of material come out from it. Then you take those samples and actually put them in SAM, one of the instruments which give you a mass spectroscopy, and determine if there is any methane, if there is any carbon material in it. I think that in-depth understanding, of the different layers that John was talking about in their composition, I think that's going to be one of the most exciting things. And when you talk with somebody like John Grotzinger, the project scientist, as John was saying earlier, it's like in the early days of learning the history of Earth. Now we are going to be in the days where we're going to learn the history of Mars as we are driving up that hill. Now, ultimately, not being a scientist, a geologist, I'd like to get up to the top of that mountain and take a scenic view. That's probably will be the highlight.
Yeah, I'll say, and it could happen relatively early meaning over the next few months, but we'll start sniffing relatively right away. I think this question of, is there methane in the Mars atmosphere? We have hints from ground-based observations. It could be due to geologic processes, but methane doesn't last very long in the atmosphere, a couple hundred years, and it breaks down, it reacts. And so whatever is causing, if there's methane, to be in the Martian atmosphere, it has to be replenished. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter actually has the resolution that if there's cows on Mars, it would have seen them. So we know it's not cows. But what is it? We have no idea what's causing the methane to come out on Mars. We think Mars is geologically, past its age of volcanism, of volcanoes, but that doesn't rule out some geochemical process that would release methane.
Considering this is informal, I wouldn't mind seeing some fossils.
Yeah, and
that will make my day.
Yep. And even if we don't see fossils, if we see the molecular fossils, evidence of broken down bits, that would be just good. The methane one, I think, will be an early excitement, just to find out if it's there. It won't tell us what it's coming from, but it would be the first hint that the seasonal methane actually exists. But the fossils is a great one. I can tell you now that the most exciting thing that the Curiosity rover will provide scientists data to discover is going to be something we've never, our imagination hasn't figured out yet. It's going to be some big discovery. And that's what happened with Spirit, that's what happened with Curiosity, is we just didn't have a clue how interesting it was going to be.
Okay, we're going to take one more question from the social media side of the house, come back here for a few more questions from the media. We'll see if these accomplished gentlemen want to have any final remarks, and we'll wrap up.
Hi, Kimberly from NASA Social and Space Camp. If there is something particular that you could tell the kids that are watching this tonight for an inspiration or some message you want to deliver, what would it be?
Well, there's a bunch of things, and Charles mentioned one of them, which is, if you love space and you love robots, this is the mission for you. And when I was growing up, it was dinosaurs and space. That's what my friends loved. That's what I loved. That's what kids of many generations have loved. Kids today are a lot more sophisticated, and I think it's robots in space. Robots in space and a robot with a laser that can zap rocks. It doesn't get any better than that.
No, I did tell you one thing. My grandson, he's 4 years old, and he loves dinosaurs. So somehow he found recently that the dinosaur was hit by an asteroid and that extinct the dinosaur. So when I went to see him recently, he came running to me and said, Grandpa, tell me about the asteroid. Are you going to protect us from those asteroids so it doesn't happen like what the dinosaurs happen? I think kids are fascinated by what's happening in space. And as John said, I mean, the rovers, we got him a little toy, rover of this thing. I mean, that's one of his favorite, toys on doing that. So yeah, it's going to be a cool mission. No question about that. Now, let me add one other thing. I think I mentioned it yesterday to you guys, but maybe for the group here. Tonight at about 9:15, if you go out and look toward the west, and you will see Mars setting down next to Saturn. And then a few minutes later, you are going to see the space station coming up in this thing. For me, that reflects the greatness of what our agency is doing. You'll have a rover heading to that planet and the space station rising up, next to it. I think that will be an iconic thing that hopefully any young person, that will inspire them about what to do in the future.
And I'll just point out, it's at 9:15 is when it rises. It'll be southwest to east-northeast. It'll set at 9:19, 63 degrees above the horizon, which is quite high. And it'll be the second brightest object in the sky.
Only an astronaut will know that detail.
Yeah, so.
Okay, two more questions here, and then go ahead.
How much of a role or how significant was the early success of MER in terms of the number of instruments and especially cameras that ended up on MSL? And the second part of that question is, how significant has MER's success and longevity over the long term had on the agency-wide success that MSL now enjoys?
Yeah, no question. I mean, Spirit and Opportunity were great advance, but no question, Curiosity is a quantum jump beyond that. Just to give you simple numbers, the payload on Spirit or Opportunity is about 10 kilograms. The payload here is about 100 kilograms. Now, it's not only the number, but also there is a dozen instruments which are flying, very sophisticated instrument. So think of Spirit and Opportunity as a geologist for the first time. They go in the field and they just look with their lens and with their hammer. And then Curiosity comes in, it's like bringing a sample back to their chemistry lab, at their university or their research lab and doing the detail analysis. Now, having said that, what we did on MER allowed us to learn a lot more about how to navigate and how to land, on the surface. So now in Curiosity, we're almost an order of magnitude more accurate, in our landing. You heard Charlie Bolden saying earlier, the accuracy of the landing that we're doing now, that is being demonstrated because we eliminated the correction maneuver, is like you are launching from the Cape toward the Rose Bowl, and you land on a specific seat, in the Rose Bowl. So that's how accurate we're coming. And that's coming because of the experience we gained, in navigating and entering, on Spirit and Opportunity. And I'm sure on future mission, we probably will be, I don't know, what's smaller than a seat in the Rose Bowl that we can really land on.
Let me add one other element to that, which you can reflect on the Hubble Space Telescope. The Hubble Space Telescope has been in orbit for 23 years. It's an icon of science around the world, not just for NASA, but wherever you go in the world, people know the Hubble, the imagery, the science, maybe some of the scientists that are involved. We have fallen in love with the Hubble Space Telescope as a tool for science, and that's in part due to its longevity. The Mars exploration rovers were designed for a 90-day mission, and I think if they'd only lasted 90 days, the science would have been great, but we wouldn't have developed this relationship with the rovers returning science back to Earth, views coming out of winter, did Opportunity survive? Yes, it survived, and people cheer, and we've developed that relationship. And the Curiosity rover, first we have to get it down safely this evening, which I'm confident we will. It has a 2-year mission lifetime nominally, but hopefully if everything keeps running with this RTG, radioisotope thermal generator, battery system, its ability to stay warm at night, and to keep operating for long periods of time and to move long distances. If we can keep it running for many years doing great science, I think the public will fall in love with Curiosity the way they have with Hubble and Spirit and Opportunity. So and you all are a part of this. The opportunity we have is to engage the public in science, in exploration, in a way that we've never been able to do before. And that's a future that I'm looking forward to.
We want to get to the top of that mountain. So we have survived many years.
Last question.
This is for John. You touched on this a little bit. Oh, I'm Lisa Grossman from New Scientist. So you touched on this a little bit before, but I'm sorry to end on a downer, but if the mission fails, will NASA look away from Mars towards other planets instead? And if so, where do we go first?
Well, regardless, we're not going to look away from Mars. We're committed to a Mars exploration program. And as I said, if we have a bad day tonight, if Curiosity doesn't land successfully tonight, we'll use that in our forward planning. We'll dust ourselves off. There's going to be a period of mourning and great disappointment. People have, those 7,000 people have spent, the better part of, half a decade or more working on these technologies, and they all want to see, Curiosity roving and doing science, and there's going to be great disappointment. But we will persevere. We will be back at Mars. We'll be back on the surface of Mars, because that's where the most interesting science is, the most interesting exploration. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to explore the other planets. We have Juno on its way to Jupiter. We have Dawn that, as we speak, is leaving Vesta on its way to Ceres, these 2 large asteroids, and they're doing amazing science. So we're continuing to explore Saturn. Lots and lots of missions. We're about to launch radiation belt storm probes to help study the Earth's ionosphere. We have Stereo, Solar Dynamics Observatory exploring the sun, our Earth science instruments. We have a great program. It's all exciting, but tonight is going to be Curiosity's night.
With that, any closing remarks, gentlemen? The next time we see these folks, it'll be game time.
Well, Dwayne flashed me a sign to remind me, and actually I will mention it. You've heard Charles say this, myself say this, NASA has said it through numerous releases. This entry, descent, and landing with a guided entry, with a supersonic parachute, with the sky crane, both as a decelerator and as, hopefully to put Curiosity down relatively gently. All these complex maneuvers, the 76 pyros. This is going to be hard. I'm on the edge of my seat right now, in fact. And there's lots of uncertainties. In 1969, when Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, were descending towards the lunar surface, we didn't have all this great reconnaissance. We had good reconnaissance. We didn't have sample return first. We were really hanging it out there, and in the end, it didn't look good in the final seconds. And some of you weren't born yet. Some of you remember. Neil was controlling the vehicle. We had a human brain with that closed-loop control, one of our nation's most experienced test pilots, who was there at the last minute so that Eagle could fly over a boulder field and set down gently somewhere safe. Curiosity doesn't have Neil Armstrong aboard. However, However, it has this fantastic team at the Jet Propulsion Lab at NASA centers around the country. And in fact, today is Neil Armstrong's birthday. So for Neil, we're going to put Curiosity successfully on the surface. So with that.
Adding to what John's saying, I mean, if I want to leave you with something, is the quote I mentioned earlier from Teddy Roosevelt. I mean, this is a message to the whole world that sometimes it's not a good, let's say, how to phrase it, that we ought to dare mighty things, particularly for the young people. That's what I tell my daughters and my students. You need to dare mighty things, even that you might fail. And sometimes failure, you learn a lesson from it and you become a better person downstream. The same thing happens here. And we have had our failures and we have had our successes. And let me tell you, the success is a lot better when you have had a failure and you learn from it. And that takes you to the next step, in your exploration. Every explorer, I'm a big fan of reading the notebooks of explorers. Every explorer had tough days. It was never easy, and hopefully the explorers of this generation also, if we have a setback tonight, will rise up, learn our lessons, and move on. And now the reason we are leaving here is that in 5 minutes, the next shift, the shift which will be here during EDL, will be starting. So John and I are going to wish them good luck. And with Charlie Bolden, we're going to go and wish them good luck. And he's taking the peanuts with him. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all.
Sorry.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you. That's good.